Welcome to BizTech's Enterprise Technology Show. Our conversation today is with Mark Linster. He's the Chief Technology Officer of EDB. Now, EDB provides enterprise-class software and services that enable businesses and governments to harness the full power of Postgres, the world's leading open-source database. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hello. Hi, Brian.
Now, Mark, for a start, give us an overview of EDB and its history.
Well, so let me just even take a step back and say, hey, one thing that the audience really needs to know. We are convinced that Postgres is the most revolutionary open source technology since Linux. And that's really how I would like to set the tone here, that, we've all gone through Linux about 15 years ago, and Linux changed the IT stack. Linux, a lot of people forget, was like the first really important open source technology that changed the enterprise. Well, the next one is here, and that is Postgres. Postgres as a database is really changing how companies do business. And you think about EDB or Enterprise DB and Postgres the way you think about Red Hat and Linux. We're the company that helps enterprises take advantage of Postgres and really make sure that they can use Postgres as a database that replaces so much of their legacy, that replaces what they used to do with Oracle, with SQL Server, with DB2, and we help them take advantage of that and take advantage of that opportunity. So that's a little bit how I'd like to position Enterprise DB.
Okay, so I'm going to move on from that a little bit and dive deeper. Now, according to Gartner, Postgres is the fastest growing database management system.
Absolutely.
Use it as probably an 80 billion market. And you've mentioned those names earlier, which are literally legacy client server type database application. Tell us about how Postgres is actually disrupting the market for database management system.
Well, so if you look at the facts today, like Stack Overflow, right, which is where developers hang out, right? Stack Overflow every year does a survey, and I think they survey about 20,000 of their developers, and they ask about the most loved, the most used tools, etc. But they also ask about the database every year. Now, for the first time ever, this year, Postgres has been the most loved, the most used, and the most wanted database for developers, right? And the years before, you had to kind of add up the statistics a little bit to position Postgres as number one. But this year, for the first time, it is very clear that from a developer's perspective, Postgres has become the number one. Now, you may ask me, why is that important that the developers want that? Well, it's because of digital transformation. Because digital transformation is not entirely, but largely driven by developers. If you can't get developers to move fast, if you can't get developers to kind of love their work environment and really take advantage of the tech, you don't move fast, right? So really getting a tech that developers embrace and want to use, love to use, strive to use, that's really what it's all about. And that's why Postgres' adoption by these critical team members is so important. So that's one angle. The other angle is that, Postgres, even supported Postgres, like what you get from Enterprise DB. Postgres cuts your database costs by 80%. Now you may say, why is that important? Well, I was a CIO, and I know that for a CIO, database license cost is the single largest software budget position that they have. It's the single biggest problem. Yeah. So when we say we can, because it's open source, right? Same movement as Linux did 15 years ago. We can take this cost down significantly. So now a CIO really has the opportunity to either put something back on the bottom line, or what I think is more important is the ability to say, I'm going to shift cost from just keeping the lights on to innovation. IT budgets are growing a little more than 1%, less than 2% per year. But businesses are growing faster. Challenges are growing faster. There's no way a CIO can actually get like 30% more money because they are asked to do 30% more things. The only way they can do it is shift the money from keeping the lights on towards innovation. And this is a great opportunity. So that's the second driver. You got the developers who drive innovation. You got CIOs who say, hey, I can finally take some of that money that actually just does not do innovation and move it towards innovation. And then you got the third thing, which is that Postgres runs everywhere. There's a historical decision that was taken over 30 years ago, way before my time, by Mike Stonebreaker, who is the original inventor of Postgres. And by the way, he's an advisor to EDB. And he decided at the time, or he and his team decided at the time, that they would use what's called the POSIX interface. So a lot of techno babble, but it basically means they use an interface that runs everywhere. And that's why Postgres runs on Windows, on Mac, on Linux, on Intel, on every cloud. And that's great because that allows the CIO, gives them total ability for agility and basically to shift things around. So they're completely unconstrained by how they deploy and where they deploy. So take this triumvirate of saying, okay, developers love it, CIOs love it, and it runs everywhere. So that's really the driver why Postgres is taking over the world.
Okay, so if I'm a CIO, I also have and I've moved away, or am moving away if I'm really stuck in legacy from client server. I'm also then, besides Postgres, evaluating things like graph database technology with the likes of Tiger Graph or Neo4j. What are then my options that steer me, or the reasons to steer me away from that into Postgres?
Well, if you look at, let's say, Neo4j or Mongo or Couchbase, they're what we would call specialty databases. So they do one thing and they do that thing very, very well. And historically, we've seen developments like that before, right? We've seen specialty hardware, and for a long time, that specialty hardware was really very popular, but the Intel chip kind of took over, and almost everything runs today on the Intel architecture. We used to have similar databases a long time ago, and I'm not that young, that were XML databases, right? Nobody talks about XML databases anymore today. Every database today can do XML. So over time, these specialty fields, if they have enough promise, get absorbed into the more general engines. So if you look at Postgres, for example, Postgres, I think about 7 or 8 years ago, started adopting JSON, which is the document format that is under Mongo. So it is one of the reasons why developers today love Postgres, because they can do unstructured stuff, just like in Mongo, but they can also do structured stuff, like in Oracle. But then even more, they can do geographic information systems. They can do key value pair. And now we're moving into even graph capabilities in Postgres. So over time, a lot of these specialty capabilities are getting absorbed into the general purpose databases. The advantage of that is that you have one skill set, you back them up one time, you run them on one infrastructure, so there's significant cost reduction. And we're seeing a lot of that happening in the market today.
Now, Mark, I want to now zoom in a little bit on the company again. What does your Asia Pacific footprint look like?
Oh, gee, it's actually quite large. I mean, we have offices, gee whiz, and I wish I had my marketing team on the call now, but I just was in Singapore a couple of weeks ago. I think we have more than 20 people in Singapore today. We've been in Japan basically since the company was created in 2006. We're very, very strong in India, not just from a development perspective, but also from a customer perspective. Very strong in Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, major markets for us. So without breaking confidentiality, I can tell you that about a third of our business today is in Asia. So a little about 45% in North America, about 20, a little over 20% in Europe, and very, very strong in Asia. So also Korea, I should mention that South Korea is a very big market, very innovative market for us. And we find that we get a lot of traction in Asia because there's a lot of desire to innovate, to conquer new markets, and as I said before, shift money from just keeping the lights on towards innovation.
Now, Mark, which sectors or industries are you particularly strong in, and why?
The biggest sector for us is banking, financial services, and insurance across the world. And we believe that is because in that sector, there's a lot of innovation being driven. It's very, very transaction intensive. There's a lot of desire to take the transaction cost down. Now you combine that and you may say, okay, well, they could just use Postgres to do that. Well, there's one more thing. There's compliance requirements. And that's why a lot of these companies, when they shift database, they don't want to just use a database that they downloaded off the internet. They want to have a partner that they can work with who is there for them in case something bad happens, in case they need advice, or in case they really want to push the envelope. So our job is to first push Postgres forward. We're probably the single biggest contributor to Postgres as an open source project, which, by the way, is supported by many companies in Asia. I'm just going to name NTT, Fujitsu, for example. They're very, very involved in Postgres. And then a lot of other companies that everybody knows, like VMware and Microsoft, et cetera. So it's a global consortium of companies behind this open source project. But companies in financial services, they love it because it brings the cost down, it drives innovation, but then they do need a partner that they can work with, a partner who is there in case something goes wrong, or in case they need advice. Or the third thing is when they push the envelope and, for example, say, I don't want to just replace Oracle for, let's say, the simple applications, but I really want to replace all my Oracle. And I want to replace Oracle RAC, right? Which is sort of like the pinnacle of where databases are today. Well, that's where companies like Enterprise DB come in, and we have technology that allows you to run Postgres with the same availability, the same uptime, the same capabilities as you used to run with, let's say, Oracle RAC or Oracle Golden Gate. Okay, so that's really why in banking, financial services, and insurance, we're very, very successful because they need that kind of capability, but they also really want to work with a global partner. And we are global today, as I said, a lot of our business in Asia, and we're present in virtually every market.
So Mark, it's interesting. And I'm going to take you back to earlier in this conversation where you said, the shifting, and which is very critical, shifting money away from keeping the lights on to digital transformation. Now, could you share some examples of how you've helped your clients in their digital transformation journey and some of the cost savings that then will be enabled by the client to then invest in other areas?
Well, I think the biggest example, now that's not the majority of our business, but it is the single biggest part of our business that I can kind of easily explain, is what we call Oracle migrations. So somebody comes to us and says, hey, I'm running all of this on thousands of Oracle cores. I don't want to get off Oracle. Can you help me? Well, we've created a special version of Postgres that actually understands Oracle's programming language natively. Okay. So we've tuned Postgres a little bit to be able to do that. And so now a lot of companies, I would say, probably not the majority of our customers, but the single biggest block of our customers that came to us for one reason, came to us because of Oracle migration. So they come to us and say, hey, we really like that capability. We would like to swap out our Oracle database and make sure that the application stack and everything around it really doesn't even understand that we changed out Oracle. We replace it with Postgres that looks and feels and smells and talks and quacks just like Oracle, and actually it is 80% cheaper. So, and that's kind of the single biggest thing. Now, what happens after that? It's not just that they want to take the cost out, right? For those of the audience and or Brian, if you've worked with commercial databases, you know that the license agreements can be quite restrictive.
Yes.
And these license agreements can do things like they do not allow you to use commercial virtualization technology. If you deploy certain database software on hardware, you need to license every core on that hardware. Well, not everybody likes to do that. So once you've moved off a commercial database onto an open source based database, well, all those restrictions disappear. You can now do sub-licensing, you can do SAN, you can deploy on every cloud that you want to. So taking the cost out, right, is like the first thing. It's like getting rid of ball and chain. Now you can start dancing and you can start doing innovative things, like you can go to every cloud that you want to. You want to deploy in containers? Great. You want to go to microservices? Great. You want to add GIS capabilities without paying the license for some spatial software? Great, do it. Let your developers go wild, because right, you don't have to worry about anymore that a developer might use a feature that is not part of the current license. And oh my God, we just paid millions. Okay, so just this first step is like, yes, you take the money out. That is important. But the really important thing is you take the constraints off.
And I think that's a really important. So I'm now putting on the lens of a CIO, and literally, as you're explaining that, I suddenly feel unshackled, because essentially what happens is this. From a very simple cost equation wise, just the ability to then take advantage of virtualization will then reduce my cost moving forward as well, just beyond just the initial savings on database licensing.
That's correct. Yes. If you, and I'm sorry, I always beat on Oracle, but they're such an easy enemy. If you run Oracle RAC, you have two places where you can run Oracle RAC: in your data center or in the Oracle Cloud. That's the only place, right? So it's great technology, and it's really, I mean, I admire what they did, but the problem is that they put the shackles on, right? And then there's one more thing I want to mention, Brian. It's not just, it's that, yes, you take the cost off. Yes, you can now go wherever you want to. But the other thing is, if you look at the Stack Overflow surveys, developers don't like these databases. Right? So, and we know today that companies intentionally create environments where they can attract the right talent. You advertise today that you are working on Linux, on Postgres, that you use the newest open source technology, that you use the most advanced stuff, because that is what attracts talent. And everybody today, I mean, talent is a huge problem, right? So you don't want to come across stodgy and old. You want to come across as saying, okay, come work for us, and we will be the most attractive workplace where you can learn the newest things. So it's not just cost and freedom to move, it's also the ability to attract the talent and retain the talent that you want to have, right?
And that's a very pertinent point, especially despite the current economic environment. Talent is still a very scarce commodity, and attracting the best talent is really important. Now, what's next for EDB? What are your future plans? We're in the second half of 2022. What's ahead for EDB, not only in Asia, but globally?
Well, I would say, let me just talk about four things. So first, we are also providing our customers with a database service in the cloud. So we have a DBaaS that we launched that really reflects our expertise in operating Postgres. So it's a database as a service that today runs on Azure and on AWS, and soon will be available on Google. So the interesting part about that is it's a fully managed Postgres service by the Postgres experts that runs on every cloud, right? So basically today, if you go to a cloud, every cloud today has its own Postgres. The challenge is you don't have the same Postgres everywhere. So if you go to one cloud and use their Postgres and you like it, well, you just suffered lock-in, right? So you just committed to one cloud and you gave up a lot of your freedom. And so our ambition is to provide a Postgres by the Postgres company that that is available on every cloud, and also embodies things like Oracle compatibility. So it makes it very easy to get there. So that's the first big innovation this year. The second one is we've launched what we call Cloud Native Postgres. Cloud Native Postgres is a Kubernetes operator that we've open sourced under the control framework of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So the people who today drive forward Kubernetes, we made a Postgres operator available under that framework for free under an open source license. That Kubernetes operator is a level 5 operator, so it allows for automatic installation, management, maintenance, failover, switchover, monitoring of the Postgres database. The reason we did that is because we believe that Kubernetes is a very, very interesting software development, and we wanted to bridge Postgres and Kubernetes. So both make it easier for Postgres users to get into Kubernetes and vice versa. And that's why we made this operator available at Valencia at the last CNCF conference in May. So that's the second interesting development. The third one is what we call Postgres distributed. We talked before about pushing the envelope with Postgres and positioning Postgres in places that traditionally were only available to software solutions like Oracle RAC. Mm-hmm. So extreme high availability, 5 nines of availability, failover, switchover times in matter of seconds, the ability to manage and upgrade the service without taking the service down. All capabilities that are really necessary, especially in a digital environment where there is no downtime. There are no more batch windows, right? Good. With Postgres distributed, which we have upgraded for a while, a version 4, and then forthcoming in the fall version 5, we are getting into that space to make available for our customers on every hardware, on every cloud, the ability to run a service that has 5 nines of availability. And then the last, I think, exciting development is obviously the annual release of Postgres and Postgres Advanced Server. Advanced Server is the Postgres version that understands Oracle natively. Advanced Server is going to, Postgres in this version is going to have a lot of interesting new capabilities. So it's going to be much, much faster. Again, like every year. The JSON capabilities that we talked about before are going to evolve even further. So for somebody who's interested in kind of schema-less development or more flexible development, Postgres becomes an even more interesting platform. And then we're going to push also the Oracle compatibility further. So every year we have thousands of customers that provide us feedback on, hey, this feature, that feature, that feature. So that right now we are at about 92% compatibility with Oracle for the databases that customers come to us for migration. And we think we're going to push that compatibility even further with the next release of Postgres Advanced Server later on this year or early next year. So those would be the 4 things that I think are on our roadmap for this year.
Now, it's been a fascinating conversation, Mark, but before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
I would just say to everybody, use Postgres, get stuff done.
On that note, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show, Mark.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you.
I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Mark Linster, the Chief Technology Officer of EDB, on BizTech's Enterprise Technology Show. This video and podcast will be on our various platforms, as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please like and subscribe to our various platforms. Thanks again for tuning in.